Today's video is about inflation. So what is inflation? It's when the rate at which general level of prices for goods and services is rising. A simpler way of saying that is inflation is when the price of things go up. Goods is talking about items. The word services is talking about things that people do for each other, but not an item. So let's give an example of inflation. So let's say that at the beginning of 2020, the price of a tire is $100, and at the end of 2020, the price of a tire is $105. So in this particular case, it's pretty easy to calculate the inflation. The inflation or the price of that tire went up by 5%. So the inflation for a tire in the year 2020 was 5%. Let's give a slightly more complicated example. So if you wanted to, in general, calculate the change in price, percent change in price, the equation that is on the left there. You take the end price minus the beginning price, and then you divide it by the beginning price. This will give you a decimal, and then you just have to change that to a percent, and that will give you the percent change in a particular price. Let's do this with a more complicated example than our tire example. Let's say that in the year 2000, November 1st of 2005, the price of a bike was $240, and then in October 31st of 2006, the price of a bike is $258. Notice that from November 1st to October 31st, that is a year has passed. Okay, so we're still here calculating the inflation over the course of a year. So let's put in our numbers into our equation. Our end price was $258. So that's where this is coming from. And our beginning price was $240. So that's where that came from. So put that, do the math for that. And it comes out to this decimal right here. In order to change this decimal to a percent, you just move the decimal point over to the right 2 times. So then you get 7.5%. So that is the annual change in price from November 1st to October 31st in this example. Okay, now that you know how to calculate inflation, what is it exactly that causes inflation? So there's a few different things, but one cause of inflation is an increase in the amount or the supply of money in circulation. Circulation here means going through a country or an economy. There are two major ways that this happens. One can be caused by inflow of wealth into the country. That is when money from outside a country comes into a country. Second one is caused by a government printing money. In every single country, there is a particular agency or department that prints the money, and if they start printing money, it can lead to inflation. This is the one I'm going to talk about the most right now. So let's give an example. So in this example, we're going to pretend that this right here on the left represents all the money going through an economy, or sorry, a country. And on the right here, we're going to say that this is all the things that the country makes, all the products made. And just to simplify our example, let's say that all the money, the only thing it can be used for is to buy these products here on the right. None of the money is saved. Every year, all the money that's circulated is spent on these products. So since there are three bills here, three $1 bills here, circulating through the economy, and this is all the things that there are to buy, it would end up being that each particular apple ends up costing one of those bills, or $1 in this particular example. Okay, so let's say that's how the year starts. The year starts with $3 circulating through the economy, three products being made. Let's say the next year, and so therefore it's $1 per apple. Let's say that the next year, the government starts printing money and circulates a lot more money through the economy. And so now there's this many dollar bills circulating through the economy, 6 of them. And there's still, however, the three products are made. How might this happen? Let's say, for example, a country were to print this extra money and then put it into the banks. And so the banks push the money out into the economy by lending it. But let's say the economy is actually not producing anything extra. The factories are not making any more products. People are not working any more hours. What would happen is that since the only thing there are to buy is these three apples, those $6 bills would go towards those three apples, and the price would change to $2 per apple. So in this particular example, it went from $1 per apple in one year to $2 per apple in the next year. So this would be an example of 100% inflation. An inflation rate that high usually comes from printing of money historically. So let's do another example. Let's have our same starting off point. $3 circulating through the economy, three apples, and $1 for each apple. And let's say that the amount of money circulating through the economy increases to 6, doubles as well. However, the economy is producing more goods. So here's an example where in this particular case, it would still be each apple is worth $1. So here's a particular case where the amount of money circulating is increasing, but it's increasing at the exact same rate that the number of products being made is increasing. Even though both the amount of money circulating has increased and the amount of product made has increased, there is zero inflation, because before it was $1 for each apple, now there's still $1 for each apple. So increasing the money circulated does not necessarily increase inflation. It only increases inflation when it is increasing faster than the increase in the stuff the country makes. Example number 3 gives that example. So if we once again start off with this example where each apple is worth $1, here both has increased, but the amount of money circulating through the economy has increased faster than the amount of product has increased. The amount of product has increased times 2, but the amount of money circulating through the economy has increased times 3. So therefore, each apple goes from the price of $1 to $1.50 for an inflation rate of 50%. So that happens if the money circulating increases faster than the amount of goods and services being produced increases. In this particular example, it'd be, once again, we're starting off with this $1 per apple. And if we end up having the opposite, where the amount of product increases faster than the amount of money increases that's circulating, well, here we have $4 and 8 apples. So if the amount of product increases faster than the amount of money circulating, you actually have the exact opposite. The price falls, and either you can think about it as the inflation is negative 50%, or the word for negative inflation is deflation. That is, deflation is the prices going down, inflation is the prices going up. So in this particular case, you can think of it as inflation of negative 50% or deflation of 50%. Okay, so long story short, if the amount of product increases faster than the amount of money circulated, prices will fall. If the amount of money increases faster than the amount of products, then the price of the products will increase. If they are both increasing at the exact same rate, then the price remains the same. There is no inflation. Okay, so a second ago I talked about this being one of the causes of inflation, the increase in the money supply. And mostly I've talked about this, where the government just prints more money. Let me give an example of inflation caused by an inflow, that is coming in. Wealth is like money. So if money comes in to a country, it can cause inflation. One particular example is Miami, Florida. A lot of money comes in from very rich South Americans into Miami's real estate market. So you have a lot of people buying property who live outside the US, and they bring that money into Miami's real estate market. And so that basically pushes up the prices of the housing in Miami. Okay, other causes of inflation. If the demand for goods increases faster than the supply increases. Demand means how much people want something. Supply is how much stuff there is out there to buy. So the demand, if people suddenly want something, and that goes up really fast, faster than the factories can produce that thing, that will cause inflation. An example is in 2020, the demand, or how much people wanted masks, went up really, really fast compared to how fast the factories could increase their making of it, especially hospital grade PPE. So in the year 2019, you could buy protective hospital grade disposable masks for about 25 cents per mask. And by the at the height of the like 2020 demand for those types of masks, I think they were up to about $5 or something along those lines. But regardless, if people suddenly increase how much they want something faster than the factories can increase their production, this will cause inflation. Another example is if the price of inputs goes up. Inputs are the things that go into making something. So for example, beef is an input for hamburgers. So if the price of an input goes up, a lot of times companies will then raise the price of the thing they sell to you, and you will experience that as inflation. you will, from your point of view, you just saw the hamburger price going up. All right. So we've talked about what inflation is and what causes inflation. What are the effects uh, for people? So in general, as when there is inflation, the value of money decreases. In this particular case, where we had, in this particular case, where we went from this to this, it used to be that the value of a dollar was an apple, and now the value of a dollar is only half an apple. You need $2 to get an apple. So inflation causes the value of money to go down because you need more of that money to buy any particular thing. This one's a little bit more confusing, but the price of objects can increase even if the value of that object does not change. So if we're looking at this particular example, the value of the apple beforehand isn't necessarily changing. Like how, when I say value here, I'm talking about how happy that apple makes you or how full that apple makes you. So when it went from this particular situation to this particular situation, how much you care about apples does not necessarily change. How much value you place on the apple does not change, even though the price might have gone up. You're not more happy for that about getting that apple, nor are you necessarily more full from eating that apple. But the price went up. Okay, so this is the general effect. What is a negative effect for people and companies, countries? One negative effect of inflation is that as the prices go up, how much you can purchase goes down. This is assuming if prices are going up faster than your wages or salaries going up. So rising prices makes how much stuff you can buy go down. That's the purchasing power of your money. Okay. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but a negative effect of inflation is it makes fixed dollar investment returns worth less. Fixed dollar investments are when you put your money into something and you always get the same amount of dollars back. We're going to talk about this more later on when we talk about investments, but if anyone knows the word bonds, bonds are a fixed dollar investment, and inflation would make those returns or how much the money you're getting from that worth less. We'll talk about that later when we talk about investments. All right. Let's give a real life example of this. Inflation or rising prices making how much you can purchase go down. As long as this is a graph of minimum wage, the federal minimum wage here in the US. The yellowish line down here is the number you would be getting from your employer, how much money you'd be getting from your employer per hour over time, 1938 to 2018. The red line is how much purchasing power that money you got from your employer could buy. So if we looked at, I'm going to look at from 1968 to about here. So that's about 1988. Okay, if you look from 1968 to about 1988, the minimum wage was actually going up during that time. So how many dollars you were getting per hour at your work was actually going up. But if you notice, how much it could buy is actually going down. The reason is, during this period of time, inflation, or the prices of things, was going up faster than this increase in wages you were getting at work. So in 1968, this $1.68, if you could use that money and buy about $11.30. This red line is in 2018 money. So this $1.60 in 1968 would buy you the same as $11.39 worth of stuff could buy you in 2018. But by 1988, this that looks about like $3.25 would only buy you about the same amount as $7.25 would buy you in 2018. Long story short, if prices rise faster than how much your wages are increasing, how much you can buy or your purchasing power goes down. All right, so this is the negative effects, and this is the effect that people think of the most when they think of inflation. However, there's actually positive effects, but it's for different people. So the positive effects of inflation is it makes your debts easier to pay. So we said that inflation makes money decrease in value. So if I borrowed $10,000 from you in, let's say, 20 years ago, if I borrowed $10,000 from you 20 years ago, but since 20 years ago, inflation has gone up by 100%. Well, that means the value of the money the value of the money has gone down by half. If everything costs twice as much, when I pay you back that $10,000, it's not really worth $10,000 anymore. It's only worth about the same as $5,000 when you lent me that money. A concrete example might be if when you lend me the money, when you lend me $10,000, it was this situation. Well, I can go and buy 10,000 apples. But let's say by the time I pay you back, this is the situation we're in. Well, I pay you back the $10,000, but you can only go and buy 5,000 apples with it. The value of that money that I paid you back has gone down by half. So inflation makes it easier to pay your debts. This is if we're looking at the US, this is what the US's inflation has looked like since 1900. If we divide the graph in half, the first 50 years of 1900 compared to the last 50 years of 1900, what you'll notice is that inflation used to go up and down a lot more than it does now. Now it's a lot more stable. Yes, you had this inflation in the 1970s that was pretty high, but other than that, our inflation has basically been between about 0 and 5% this whole time in the last, from 1950 to, well, now. If we look at just in the last 20 years, this is the US's inflation. The gray areas is the last two recessions, or the first two recessions in the 2000s. And during this whole time, inflation has basically been pretty steady. It has not been that high nor that low. And I'm comparing that compared to historically. Here, inflation went all the way up to 20%, down to past negative 10%. Since 2000, it's been a lot more steady, between about 0 and 5%, only getting above 5% or below 0%, very infrequently. I said these gray areas right here are where you have a recession. So during a recession, people end up losing their jobs. People will end up buying less things. So their demand, or how much they want objects, ends up going down. They end up buying less stuff. So that actually causes inflation to go down, and sometimes even negative. All right. So this is the overall inflation since 2000. But a lot of times when you're thinking about inflation, you should think about it compared to your wages going up. So it's not really an issue if prices go up, as long as your salary or your wages goes up at least as quickly. If we're looking at wages going up compared to the price of things going up, here's a graph from 1985 to 2018 for these four particular things. This black line is the median income for males or for guys. And this is talking about the price of housing, healthcare, a vehicle, that's like a car or a truck, and college. So in 1985, the median guy looks like they made about $23,000 a year. And if you add up the price of housing, healthcare, a car, and college, it looks like it was about $14,000. However, since 1985 to now, and now if you basically add up housing, healthcare, vehicle, and college, is actually higher than what the median guy makes. In particular, you want to be looking, healthcare has in particular gone up by a lot. If you look at how high this pink part is on the left compared to how high it is on the right, the price of healthcare has gone up times 5. Another one that's gone up very, very fast is college. If you look at how wide the green part here is in 1985 compared to how wide it is here in 2018, it's gone up at least times 3, times 4. Versus the median male's wages, if this is about 23,000 on the left, here it's about, it looks like about 52,000 on the right. So it's only gone up by times 2.5, between 2 and 2.5. All right. All right. So that's looking at wages compared to inflation. But all this I've said so far has only been in the U.S. different countries have a different normal amount of inflation that they see. For the US, the normal amount of inflation that we've seen in the last, from 2000 to about 2020, is somewhere between about 1 and 2% inflation per year. The average is probably a little bit below 2%. Anything above 5% or below zero is very uncommon for the US in the last 20 years. But if we're looking at other countries, it's different. And what is considered normal for them is different. If we're looking here, this is Brazil from 1986 to 2000. And their inflation shot all the way up here to 80% in the early 1990s. If you look at that compared to the US, the highest we had in the last more than 100 years was only 20%. So 20% would be this line right about here. So our highest inflation was near what their average inflation was from 1986 to about, looks like 1994. If we're looking at Brazil in just the more recent time, here is Brazil's more recent inflation, 2000, 2016, and their inflation has been over 5% almost that whole entire time. Compare that to Japan. Here's Japan from 1970 to 2012, and their inflation is much lower. In fact, if you are comparing this to the US, it's actually much lower than in the US in the more recent history. Here's the sort of zoomed in, so this is just 1990 to 2017. And especially we're looking at the, let's say, 1995 onward, inflation is near zero. And in Japan, they've experienced deflation or negative inflation a lot more than the US has. One thing that is common for all countries, though, if you're looking at the way back in the past compared to more recent times, in all countries, the inflation has been going, varies, goes up and down a lot more in the past than it has in more recent times. That's true for the US. It goes up and down more in the past than more recently. It's true for Brazil. It's true for Japan. And that's because countries started purposely trying to keep their inflation more steady. Okay, so that's a quick overview of inflation